Welcome back. Here with WION. Let's take a look at some of the reactions that have come in on the budget this year. We'll start, of course, with the Prime Minister's most key critic, Rahul Gandhi. This is the tweet that's come out from the President of the Congress Party. 4 years gone, still promising farmers a fair price. 4 years gone, fancy schemes with no matching budgets. 4 years gone, no jobs for our youth. Thankfully, only one more year to go. That's a pretty confident Rahul Gandhi, I should say. Let's go across and see what Amit Shah of the BJP, of course, has had to say. He says, in a major move to benefit salaried class and create new jobs, government will now contribute 12% of the wages as EPF in all sectors for the next 3 years, and to encourage more women at the workplace. Their contribution will be brought down from 12% to 8%. Remember, this is for women who are joining the workforce. It's applicable to women in their first 3 years in employment. Smriti Irani, thank you, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, and Finance Minister Arun Jaitley ji, for increasing the number of gas connections distributed under Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana to 8 crore and providing 3 crore more women a better quality of life. We've got one more tweet, this one from Nandan Nilekani. He says, the budget has recognized the major weaknesses and shortcomings in our approach to education and made unprecedented commitments. My take on budget 2018. Of course, he's plugging his article that he's written for a publication thereafter. But all in all, we've got some critics. Rahul Gandhi, as expected, hitting out at the Prime Minister, hitting out at the budget itself. Meera Sanyal continues to be with us on the broadcast from Mumbai. Meera, the question of women, the Prime Minister has spoken at length about bringing more women into the workforce. His Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao Andolan is another key initiative that he's undertaken. As far as this, bringing the EPF down for women entering the workforce, do you think that's going to go a long way in encouraging women to, make their way into formal areas of employment?
In fact, I'm quite perplexed at this move. I don't see how it benefits any woman. When a woman is going into the workforce, in fact, you want to encourage her to save for her future. So by cutting the EPF contribution for a woman is actually a very retrograde step. You should encourage the woman to contribute as much as she likes, and if at all, more than the amount rather than less than the amount. So I'm quite perplexed as to why those kind of moves are being so touted. But one of the things I would like to say is, in taking up on what Mr. Summers had said, I think really if you look at it in perspective, the Finance Minister has been grappling with two deficits. One is the fiscal deficit, which we've talked quite a bit about. But the second, which is very important, is the trust deficit. This government has made many promises. If you recall, in 2014, we were promised 15 lakhs in everyone's accounts. We were promised 10 million jobs a year. None of these things have happened. And this year, particularly with the rising oil prices, his scope for any kind of fiscal expansion is very, very limited. So they've squandered 4 years when they had low oil prices and they had headroom, and they raised taxes and royalties by 30 and 46% respectively. This year they don't have that headroom. And if oil prices rise further, as they may well do, then even this, this magnanimous spending which they're talking about on education and health may not be possible. And that will further fuel the trust deficit. So what I'm perplexed about is why this government did not do things which would not have caused them this problem. For example, we have a big crisis in the banking sector. Right. We know that we require 2.1 trillion rupees to recapitalize the sector. Why did the government not announce disinvestment in public sector banks? Why did they not go by the Narasimha Committee recommendation or the PJ Naik recommendations to bring down equity holdings in the public sector banks to below 51%? These are things where your stock markets are high, you need more capital. These are the things that the government could have done effortlessly, which would have also lifted spirits. It would have shown that this government is serious about tackling the real issues of the economy.
All right, stay with me, Meera Sanyal. I've got a question following up on the question of trust deficit for you, Parag. Come to that in just a second. But before we do that, let's take a look at some of the key allocations in other sectors. Let's look at the employment sector first up. The Finance Minister Arun Jaitley said, citing an independent study, informed Parliament that 70 lakh formal jobs will be created. In addition to this, the Indian government will contribute 12% of wages of new employees in the EPF for all sectors for the next 3 years. As far as women employees' contribution to EPF goes, it's been reduced to 8% for the first 3 years of employment. As far as education goes, the Finance Minister has announced some major investments. Digital intensity in education will be increased. Education institutions will be moving from blackboards to digital boards. For this, 1 lakh crore rupees has been set aside. An integrated B.Ed program, or a Bachelor in Education program, has been announced for teachers as well. More than 13 lakh teachers will be trained under this modified Right to Education Act. The Finance Minister also announced the creation of Eklavya schools for tribal children. In addition to this, 18 schools of planning and architecture will be established. In the social sector, the Indian government is planning to expand the coverage under the Jan Dhan Yojana. Allocation for development of the scheduled caste and tribes has risen to 56,600 crores and 39,000 crores respectively. Mr. Jaitley also announced the construction of more than 2 crore new toilets under the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. In the railway and airport sectors, 1.48 lakh crore rupees has been allocated to the railways for the year 2019. More than 5 lakh crores has been allocated for the completion of 35,000 kilometers of the Bharatmala project. The government plans to spend 11,000 crores to add tracks to the Mumbai rail network. In addition to this, a suburban network of 160 kilometers has been planned for the IT city, Bengaluru. 17,000 crores will be invested in this project. The infrastructure sector has been described as the growth accelerator of the economy by the Finance Minister. An allocation for infra projects is nearly 5 lakh crores. 11,000 crore investment will be made in the Mumbai urban rail transport. Smart city projects worth 20,800 crores are in progress, and the government also plans to develop 99 smart cities with outlays of 2.04 lakh crore rupees. That's a lot of numbers. I'm going to ask Parag to help us understand the takeaways in just a second, but let's also look at the startups and the micro, small and medium enterprises, MSMEs. The Indian government has projected a target of 3 lakh crore for lending under the Prime Minister's Mudra Yojana. 25% corporate tax benefits will be extended to MSMEs having up to 250 crore rupees in turnover. Nearly 3,700 crores has been allocated for credit support, capital and interest subsidy on innovation in this sector. You know, my biggest worry, Parag, when the budget comes around is that there's going to be so many numbers, and it's going to be difficult for regular people to make sense of what this means for them. You know, what does it mean on the ground for individuals such as you and me? You work, of course, in an interesting sector. You work with people in these rural areas that have been captured in today's budget. If we are to look at the budget from their point of view and as your point of view as a service provider, what has been the big gap for you?
So I think one sector, one area which is clearly not getting its enough attention from the government side is the social sector. A small company like ours, over the last 1 year, we've created 250 jobs. By the end of this year, we expect to go closer to 1,500 jobs. And we, with the right kind of execution support, with the right kind of environment in which we can execute, we could possibly go up to 50,000 jobs in the next 5 to 7 years. This is one company we are talking about. So clearly there is a lot of room over here that exists for checking several boxes at the same time. So our company, we deliver safe water, which touches upon health, which touches upon increased education because children feel better in school. It touches upon economic productivity because the lady who spends time today trying to fetch water every day to her house can now spend her time trying to earn money and increase economic productivity. It basically touches upon wellness and health. So, and it's preventive health. It's not, corrective health. So there is so many things. It creates jobs. We upskill people. We provide vocational training, skill development, so on and so forth. And there is so much that can be really done. So, this space really needs attention. The government's intent to go down the development path is absolutely clear, and it is much appreciated. They've clearly backed themselves to take this country forward down the development agenda that they first brought out and presented in 2014. But having said that, they really have to get the execution right in so many ways. I'm hopeful that they will. I believe that they will. They're well placed to do it, but they will need to keep tweaking the methodology going forward very carefully.
And 4 years is a long time. I mean,
that's
as
right.
Meera Sanyal was pointing out,
just one more point. Globally, in whichever country GST was implemented, the party that brought it in didn't win the next election.
Okay, so we'll call you back when we do our discussion after the general election. So I'm just saying that,
I hope that they are able to break that trend.
All right, we'll have to wait and watch on that. Let me go across to Yashish Dahiya also on that note. Yashish, one set of people who have figured prominently in today's budget has been the senior citizen category. A lot of SOPs have been announced for them at least. Do you think that by doing so, Mr. Jaitley has in some ways, let's say, also looked at, the NRIs, people who are living abroad but have family back here. This was a concern that came up in our conversations with some, non-resident Indians, that they felt that more had to be done for senior citizens who are living in India without their families. All right, we're having difficulty, hearing Yashish. He's joining us from Paris. We'll try and reconnect with him in just a second. Let me go across in the meantime to my other guest in the studio, Jasper Reed. Jasper, the trust deficit that Meera Sanyal brought up, that's I suppose in some ways a bigger deficit to fill than the fiscal one, because the expectations of 1 billion plus Indians are riding on this budget. It comes at a time when the elections are just around the corner. So keeping that in mind and looking at what Parag just told us as somebody who works in the rural sector, the challenges were many for the finance minister, but has that gap been bridged in some ways?
Well, I think 3 cheers for Meera for raising the point that, this is a very serious moment for the administration. So every new administration, and let's not forget Mr. Modi is a fresher in terms of the role, deserves a certain amount of time to settle in. But the rubber's now about to hit the road, and I think where I'm confused is there is no end of policies, there is no end of constituencies addressed by this. And I'm with Ron in the sense that by and large, it's optimistic, it's positive, and we all should be positive. But it's very unclear at this stage of the game how all of these activities actually join up into a cohesive strategy.
Right.
And I think here, if Meera in her job as CEO of RBS was to present a strategy based on a shopping list of various things, I think she'd be shouted down very quickly by her board. So I think now these items may or may not be beneficial, but we need to understand how they all join up, what the priorities are, and what the overall strategy is for this massive exercise in reform. And I think the administration now would do very well to heed the warnings of Meera and sit down and carefully understand how they're going to execute this stuff, because there ain't going to be a second chance now.
Absolutely. And as you said right at the start of the show, the elections could be as early as the end of this year. I mean, if that plan goes ahead. So the time is running out. I believe Yashish Dahiya is back with us on the broadcast. Yashish, we were, of course, looking... I asked a question of you earlier. Our line got cut off, but it was specifically about senior citizens. What is your thought about how they've been included in this budget?
You've got 2 things happening, right? Of course, a savings rate up to 50,000 rupees being tax-free, as well as your health insurance, where earlier it was 30,000 was the tax break that you were getting. Now you're getting 50,000. And that kind of makes sense because, older people, the health insurance does cost a lot more. Even a 5-10 lakh rupee cover at an older age can cost quite a bit. And having a tax break for something as simple as health insurance. In fact, our suggestion was that for pure health insurance and for pure life insurance, not the investment joke that happens with life insurance, but for pure life insurance, you should actually have no limit on the tax break. Because if a person can out of their own salary take out money to buy health insurance and life insurance, the least they expect from the government is at least a tax break on that. So I think positive steps, but I would just say one thing, and that's what I like about this government somewhere. Nothing that was put out in the budget today seems to be aimed at winning the election. And all of it seems to be fundamental stuff that's, one is hoping to do something good for someone. But those people will not realize it immediately. Like health insurance, nobody's coming out and voting because they have health insurance. There's nobody who's been given, 100 rupee, 200 rupee a day to go have a party. I think the time of those is sort of past us. And what they're trying to do is lay the social infrastructure for the country. Of course, it takes time. I think people who are expecting it to happen in 4, 5, or even 10 years are pipe dreaming.
Right. Because
this country is 70 years old. What have we achieved in terms of our situation vis-a-vis various other countries which were in our situation 60, 70 years ago? And why are we suddenly getting so uptight about 4 years having passed and nothing much having been done? It's a big country. It can't be delivered in 4 years.
Okay, but then perhaps the promises shouldn't be made to start with. Jagdish Khattar, let me check if he's with us on the broadcast. I just want to go back to what Yashish said, and I think, Yashish, you might find yourself isolated on that opinion as far as this budget not being, focused on winning in terms of election goes. Let me take that to Meera Sanyal. Meera, do you think that the budget appeared not focused on next year's election?
I have to say, in fairness, everything that this government has done from day one has been focused on elections. And some of the things they've done have actually backfired terribly on them. As the economic data is showing us, demonetization was a disaster, not just for the people of India, but also for this government, because it's really going to come and bite them. But, apart from all of that, and not to make political points, I think the real issues that are facing India are really about jobs and livelihoods for our young people. There was an ILO survey, and I think that is something which is very, very significant. We have a working population of about 530 million people. We're adding 12 million people to the workforce each year. But out of those 530 million people, about 400 million people are in vulnerable jobs. And the definition of a vulnerable job is less than 200 rupees a day. So we have footloose employees and working poor, and this is what is going to reflect in the elections. The promise of Achhe Din was a promise of livelihoods and jobs.
Yes.
And that has not materialized. And that is something that all of us, no matter which political party we subscribe to, that is an urgent and real problem for India, which we must all devote attention to, particularly the government in power.
Okay, stay with me, Meera. Before we, go any further, let's take a look also at the way the markets reacted after the finance minister put out the budget earlier today. They got the jitters as Mr. Jaitley read out that speech. The Sensex crashed over 400 points as the minister announced a 10% levy on capital gains of more than 1 lakh rupees. Adding to the market sentiment, the government also set a fiscal deficit target at 3.3%, which was higher than the 3% indicated in the economic survey. Moreover, there was no anticipated reduction in corporate tax rates. It was brought down only for businesses with annual revenue of less than 2.5 billion rupees. And to top it all, the minister said he was leaving the tax slabs unchanged, leaving less money in the hands of the middle class to spend. The markets recovered slightly towards the end of the day, but still closed lower. Remember, they've been rallying the last couple of days. Of course, the Prime Minister's visit to Davos was credited for some of that activity as far as the markets go. And interestingly, Jasper, while the Prime Minister was in Davos, there was this other study that came out which said that, only 1% of India's super rich were the ones that benefited over the past year in terms of actual changes to their salaries. That gives you an idea of the picture that we're looking at. So it's a huge gamble in that sense to be trying to focus on the rural, to focus on the poor, when really speaking they've not benefited a hell of a lot in the last couple of years.
Well, I think for the very reason they haven't benefited is the very reason we have to focus on them. I mean, Meera Ma'am put this very well. There's 500 million people, pretty much, who we've got to take care of, and that's the first duty of any administration in this country. The issue is how does that happen? Through the kind of the fog and complexity of the budget, and there is a lot of complexity in it, everything from bamboo to Gandhi's 150th anniversary and all this kind of stuff. It is a bit hard to pick out where exactly the solution for the 500 million comes from.
Right.
That's going to be a sword of Damocles for some time.
Fair enough, and that is something that the opposition party has picked up on, Parag. They've spoke of how, especially Rahul Gandhi, who's been very critical of the Prime Minister repeatedly. I suppose that's his job also as, the head of the main opposition party. But beyond the politics of it all, if we are to look at, we're running out of time, just a few more minutes left on the discussion. Closing comments from you in terms of the budget. We've already had Mr. Khattar say that the media concentrates too much on a budget that really doesn't make that much of a difference anymore, given that there are all kinds of reform measures that happen through the year.
So the one thing that has happened over the last 4 years is that Mr. Modi has emerged as the greatest ambassador of hope that this country would have ever imagined, and he remains absolutely in pole position to take this country forward. I'll quote Albert Einstein, who said, vision minus execution is equal to hallucination. I really believe that India should be a case of vision plus execution is equal to glory. And I sincerely hope that things will happen. I'm very sure.
And you think Mr. Modi is the man for that?
Well, yes. He's got a strong intent.
Okay.
He's determined, and I think that is so. So those bricks are absolutely in place.
Okay, but he does need the mandate for the next 5 years to make sure that he's able to see it through.
And maybe the country must give him that mandate, because
right.
It's not possible to turn around a country in one term. So if we gave him 2014, we owe him 2019. Is how I would look at it.
Interesting, Jasper. That's interesting. I've got just enough time for a very quick reaction from you on that.
I think in the end, at this stage of the game, probably the answer to everything is to a certain extent humility. And I would hope that underneath all of this, there's a recognition of the administration that this is the mother of all tasks and must be approached with the utmost humility and knowledge that it takes time and it's hard.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Before I thank all of you, I just want to quickly take our viewers through the defense allocation in this budget. It didn't come up in the finance minister's speech. They may have been forgiven for expecting that only months after the Doklam standoff with China that the armed forces could see a bigger defense budget, but that didn't happen. Nor, it seems, was Finance Minister Arun Jaitley inclined to be generous given the gravity of the situation on the line of control with Pakistan, where 860 ceasefire violations were recorded last year. The first 21 days of this year also saw 124 ceasefire violations. So how much has Mr. Jaitley given to the forces? Last year, the defense budget was that's a lot of numbers, 2.75 crore rupees, or I'm obviously getting that wrong, 274,000 crore rupees, or about $43 billion. This year's defense budget is 296 crores, or $46 billion. Spending on equipment will be 99,563 crores, or $15 billion. It's a modest 7% increase, making up just 1.58% of the projected GDP for the current year. It's the lowest increase since the 1962 war, according to some estimates. Comparatively, the armed forces of countries in India's neighborhood are getting a better deal, even though their national borders aren't under threat. There are no insurgencies backed by foreign powers, and their armed forces are mostly in peace stations. China spent $151 billion on its military last year. Ironically, it was a 7% increase over 2016. Saudi Arabia spent $51 billion in 2017. Japan spent $48 billion. Pakistan's defense budget last year was $8.78 billion, far less than India's. But since the army dominates the polity and economy, it's able to leverage that dominance to get whatever it wants. Its alliance with China brings other benefits not usually reflected in budget papers. All right, so that was the defense allocation and a comparison with India's neighbors as well. We'll wrap up the show on that note. Not before I thank my guests, Ron Summers. I'm sorry I couldn't come across to you with more questions. Parag Agarwal, Jasper Reed, Meera Sanyal, Jagdish Khattar, and Yashish Dahiya. Thank you all for making time.